Welcome to another episode of Cyber Coast to Coast. I'm one of your hosts, Craig Schober, and I'm hailing from the West Coast in Long Beach, California, and I'm joined by my brother, Scott. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going there, everybody? Great to be with you there, Craig.
Good to have you, and good to be back for another great episode. Quick rundown: we got three solid stories. One involving Samsung data breach. One is looks like Anonymous is at it again with the Russian hacking and the Ukraine war. And third story is kind of three cybersecurity companies do well and provide some free services to our most vulnerable infrastructure. So we'll get into all those great stories. But first, just wanted to mention that this episode is brought to you by Cyberlytica, and they provide proactive cybercrime intelligence. And you can learn all about their services at cyberlytica.com. Before we get into the first story, maybe we want to start out with our kind of cyber tip of the week and discuss something that hit us personally as a company. You know more about this, Scott, than I do, so you can take over. But I just wanted to introduce it as a kind of a ID spoofing email threat that we're all vulnerable to, and it involved our sales force and our resellers. So what quickly kind of what happened there?
This was an interesting one, and it caught me a little off guard because it seemed so real. I received several emails from different resellers, all within a very short period of time, within about an hour. And they were all asking, "Is this you, Scott? Are you really asking me about this?" And interestingly enough, the email said something to the effect of, hope you're doing well, and had, a very, very soft language in the beginning that sounded like it was me talking to them, kind of, how are you doing, this and that, breaking down the barriers, like, somebody close. And then they said, I need you to do me a really big favor. I need to purchase some equipment, and I need you to do me a favor and help with the wire transfer part of it. And if you could pay, receive this money and then pay out some money, but keep a portion of it for yourself and help me out, it would be, it'll be a big favor, and I'll take care of you later, kind of thing. Which is, well, number one, I wouldn't do that with my resellers, try to use them to leverage something, to do something. It sounded to me, very sketchy. But for somebody receiving it, it sure did sound convincing. And it looked like it came from me because they spoofed my name, my signature. And sometimes I always look for little nuances and tell people to do this. And the part that was interesting is, we just put up recently that we're celebrating our 50 years as a company, and there's a little logo on our website. They actually went on our website, they extracted that, and they embedded it into my signature. And instead of my actual email address, they created one that would seem like it would be a legitimate email address. And it was simply my name, Scott Schober at bvsystems.com, which is not a valid email address for me.
Right. The
However,
domain, it's a BV Systems domain, was valid,
exactly.
but the name, the nomenclature wasn't. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were a reseller and you received that, you would think, well, it says his name in BV Systems. They may not even notice that that's not my real email address, because it's my real name and it's a real company, and so it's the correct domain, so on and so forth. Very convincing. And my signature, everything was the same, except they changed it to this fake email address. And then they used this new logo. So if you read it, you say, wow. The good news is we have very intelligent distributors and resellers around the globe, and they're savvy, they're cyber savvy, and they questioned it. And I thank them for that. They reached out to me, and they wrote to the email for me that they actually have on file. And in a few cases, some of them I know close enough because I visited them in their country, or they've been out here and we've spent time together, had a meal together, and they have my personal email. And they reached out. And I think in one case, I even received a text. So one of the resellers has my cell phone number. So I want, first of all, I want to say thank you. That's a good example of what to do if you receive an email and you're just not 100% sure if it's legit. because they could have so easily said, well, hey, okay, it's a lot of money, $39,000, but in the way it looks is they'll make about $4,000 to $5,000 profit if they just help, this company, Berkeley Varitronics out, Scott Schober, help them out. So total scam, very annoying. So I had to alert my distributors around the globe to be aware of this so they don't fall victim. You think the dust settles then? Just yesterday, I received yet another one. This one was slightly different. It didn't have the same logo embedded in my signature. And it was, again, a spoofed email. So it appeared it came from my actual email, which is scott@bvsystems.com. But if you go in and do if you actually look at the raw headers and search it and see where it actually originated from, it is not from our domain or anything else. It was just simply a spoofed email and a poor attempt to spoof my signature, and the content, again, was trying to get them to get on WhatsApp and have a conversation about some help that I needed. So they were probably trying to lure them in to get some personal information, right, or get them to transfer money or something like that. I don't know, because obviously it stopped right there. But of course, I reached out to the actual hackers, and I'm waiting for a response to let them know, hey, I'm on to them. I know their email. I know their IP address. I know some stuff about them, and I'm reporting them to the authorities. And suddenly it went quiet as usual. They run and move on to the next.
Right. That reminds me of the the classic Nigerian scams. They kind of start out, it feels like when you analyze them from afar, at least, it looks like, oh, it's a phishing attack of some sort, but they really don't put links in there. What they do is end up saying, can you help me move a large sum of money over? And in return, I'll give you a slightly smaller sum. And they kind of play on people's greed. And so it's really turns into a socially engineered attack, because what they do is they develop a correspondence with their victims, and they go back and forth and play on their emotions. And kind of reminds me of this great show I saw once called the Nigerian Scam. It's this guy, he's an actor. He's been on a bunch of American movies, a bunch of comedies and stuff. Kind of plays a goofball, but he's pretty smart. If you've seen him in interviews, he's an actor called Dean Cameron, and he wrote this play, and the play is based on his actual inter exchanges with a genuine Nigerian scam that he got in the email. And he went, and this lasted for years. He corresponded back and forth with them. And I can't get, there's so many twists and turns in the story. You just have to look out for this yourself and watch it. I think it might be on YouTube still.
That's great.
But it's a great rental. It's a great way to learn about just how far scammers are willing to go to play a role, and just how far this guy was willing to pretend to be a victim and scam them in return. And a lot of great back and forth. Maybe they'll make a dramatic fiction movie based on that someday. It would be fun to watch too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I guess the takeaway from this for our listeners is, a lot of times within your immediate network, within your organization, it's pretty safe to say you can trust your employees. You'll communicate, you'll run down to the office, say, hey, did you send this? Are you asking for a wire transfer? This, that. More than likely, you're going to do that. However, you got to also think outside of your immediate walls in your facility. Think about your partners, your vendors, your resellers, your distributors. Make sure that everybody that you're working with in business is also cyber savvy and feels comfortable enough to pick up the phone, to send you an email, to double check things before they step over that line and wire transfer any money or anything like that. And that kind of was a standout after dealing with this firsthand just over the past 2 weeks of having 2 hacking attempts that were made. And unfortunately, I would be the conduit, or supposedly the conduit, without me even knowing it. If they didn't point this out, they may have been duped, wire transferred money, been scammed. And now I have my name associated to it. In their mind, they'd be a little bitter at me, maybe, even though I've never seen it. I'm not party to the emails. It's only because they shared it with me that I realized. So what a deceiving cyber criminal. And they're pretty crafty there. So everybody be on the lookout and ask those questions to your trusted partners and distributors and employees, everyone.
All right. Good word of advice. On to our first story. Um, Samsung confirms data breach after hackers leak internal source code. This one came from TechCrunch, but
Mhm.
you might see it around. I think I saw it on The Verge also and other tech blogs because there's so many Samsung devices out there, so many Samsung users that it really does affect a giant portion of the internet users and population at large. Couple key points out of this story I noticed. I don't know, maybe you've come across this group, Lapsus, with a dollar
Mhm.
sign at the end. They're a hacking group. They're the ones that claim responsibility. There's not getting much in the way of anything beyond the formal statements from Samsung. So it's not clear if they can confirm that Lapsus is that with some kind of, a lot of the times these groups put in these little codes and little messages and stuff that really link them to past crimes, past hacking endeavors. And so you could kind of connect the dots and, determine,
Yeah.
oh, these guys are definitely there and they're based in, I don't even actually know where they're based out of. But I think Samsung issued their standard thing. They didn't see any impact to our business or customers. So it wasn't kind of a forward facing hack that's going to hack customers' personal info. It was more of a back end thing. But it did involve some biometric
Hmm.
data that Samsung stores, I guess, locally on the phone. What is that? Bootloader source code. I'm seeing on involving their smartphones and their tablets, and it was about 190 gigs of data, so pretty substantial. I don't know how much data is stored per user or per device that would amount to so many gigs of data being stolen, but it's got to affect a lot of models and devices, I would think, considering it's so big. And also apparently this group Lapsus was also behind the an NVIDIA hack on the
Yeah.
the
It was like a
popular.
terabyte they stole, right? Of data.
Yeah, they demanded a cryptocurrency from a payment from NVIDIA, but I couldn't find if NVIDIA ever paid that. So hopefully they didn't, and they're holding out
Yeah.
and figured a way around it. I don't know.
Well,
What are
well,
your
one
thoughts on
thing
this group?
I have heard about lapsus before, and just to point out, which I think is kind of interesting, the natural assumption we probably all make is, oh, they're probably from Russia. Well, in this case, they're actually they're newer to the game, and they're a Brazilian hacking group,
Mm.
which is kind of interesting, which is showing um, there's an international appeal for cyber criminals and hackers. Now, that being said, many of these large hacking rings, what I'm finding is the headquarters, let's say, does originate out of Russia, where the actual coding is written, where the malware is authored. And then what they're doing is they're distributing it. They've actually got an efficient network to distribute it to partners and other hacking groups in different countries, such as this country. So it may have been written initially, the malware and the hack kind of originated out of Russia, but it was launched by this Brazilian hacking group when they trace it back.
Mhm.
But I just find it kind of interesting how it's not always just everybody always here, at least in the United States. I often hear, oh, it's probably China, it's probably Russia. Well, not necessarily. Cyber criminals are global, it's a global enterprise. They're spreading out their footprint, they're getting more efficient. And they reuse a lot of the code that, yes, originally it was written in Russia.
Mhm.
Just as a clarification point there, but from the sheer amount of information that's stolen here, yeah, it's a lot. It's not that big a deal. But when it's tied into what you talked about, that the algorithms for biometric unlock operations, that's really scary, and maybe even more so that the bootloader source code for some of the tablets and the smartphones, that's scary. And even it mentioned some of the source code for Qualcomm, one of the largest chip makers. They've got tons of intellectual property tied to pretty much everybody's smartphone. If you have a smartphone, there's probably either chipsets in there from Qualcomm, or there's a license for their intellectual property in there. I could almost guarantee it. So
Mm.
it's amazing how far this reach is and how dangerous it is, because we assume that when we lock our phones, be it with a passcode, facial recognition, some type of biometric unlocking, it's 100% safe. Guess what? Not necessarily. So a lot of caution has to be put out there, because what they could do with this is untold damage.
Mm. Yeah, and I believe besides iPhone, I could be wrong on this. I think Samsung is the only other smartphone maker, or at least large smartphone maker, that does a true kind of end-to-end encryption on device.
Yeah.
In other words, there's certain data sets, yeah, that's going to communicate to the cloud, and that's just that's the way it has to go for certain services. But there are other basic kind of secure services. I think they call it Fort Knox or something like that, and it's their own version of what iPhone has touted for years as being the most secure. What happens on your iPhone stays on your iPhone, that kind of stuff. Stuff that's so secure, even Apple themselves can't pull this information from your phone. And Samsung has a very similar system. So it does worry me. I mean, this story doesn't provide enough info, and I'm sure Samsung's not going to reveal that, even if they knew exactly what. But it's worrisome if somehow someone could get the keys to decrypt the phone that even Samsung couldn't themselves decrypt, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always something to look out for. And that stuff, if once it ends up on in places like the dark web, forget it. Then it's everywhere instantaneously. And speaking of the dark web, that brings me to our sponsor for this episode, Cyberlytica. These guys are experts in the dark web, not in the bad way, but in the good way. They're good guys that spend a lot of time scraping the dark web, looking for passwords and emails and all types of credentials that might have been hacked and stolen and spread in the dark web. And they'll alert you to, once you sign up for their service, they'll alert you or your enterprise, your small business, every time that stuff appears, and they'll send you warnings, and they'll send you solutions for these type of things. And you can consult with them, and you could, most importantly, you can see your profile on the dark web, because that's one place where you don't want a big footprint. A big profile is on the dark web. You want to be invisible, but it's almost impossible to be invisible on the dark web, because everything, credit card numbers, and from names to credit card numbers, are being sold and traded on there. So go to cyberlytica.com today if you think you've got if there's any chance that you're on there, because you want to be forewarned and therefore forearmed.
Yes, very good.
Yeah, and that brings us to our next story, which involves this ongoing cyber war, real war and cyber war, I should say, between Russia and the Ukraine and all the allies on either side. Although I don't think Russia's got too many allies these days.
Not many.
Yeah. But one of the allies on Ukraine's side is this kind of global collective known as Anonymous. And the headline reads, Anonymous claimed it hacked Russian TVs and showed the true devastation of Putin's Ukraine invasion. I saw this one on Fortune and thought it was interesting because, well, first of all, there was some nice links that takes you, if you go to Fortune and find this headline, you'll see there's a couple of nice links that will take you directly to some Twitter feeds, people reposting. I think it was originally posted from Anonymous's Twitter feed, and then other people are reposting it. But there's people shooting their TVs. These are shots coming from Russia primarily. Now, I think that what this was kind of a counter misinformation almost, because Russian TV, from what I hear, I obviously I don't live in Russia, I don't get their feed, so I don't see it, but I'm hearing so many stories about just utter denial that a war is even happening. Yes. It's Russian authorities don't want their own people to rise up against them and protest, so they're saying there's nothing's happening. Please disperse, go look the other way, nothing's going on. And Anonymous, I guess, is trying to kind of fly the flag of truth and say, hey, why don't we take a look over here, because you can't deny these graphic images, and these are real people being killed for real. And so they hacked several networks, these Russian streaming services, kind of like our Netflix. One's
Hmm.
called Wink and one's called Ivy or Ivy. These are and a bunch of conventional kind of pro-Kremlin broadcast channels, like Russia 24 is one of them, and I think a few others. Did you see any of these hacks, or I mean, it's all in Russian, so we can't really
Yeah.
get the full message, but it's something else when you can hack war propaganda to counter it completely so that
Oh, it's
the
crazy.
citizens see it.
Yeah, this is truly a cat and mouse game. Certainly, what's going on there, and I think the fact that anonymous, and again, it becomes kind of a political issue. Anonymous is kind of like a hacktivist group, pseudo vigilante, jumping in here and trying to go up against Russia by hacking and taking down different services and things, because clearly there is manipulation of the media in Russia, and Putin, it does want to send a very clear message. And watching some of these clips, you can kind of get a quick sense of it there. But again, not understanding Russian, it makes it very challenging. But and just recently, maybe just to add to it, maybe another thought, because it's kind of interesting. People are taking such a strong stand, and this is almost from a global community, against some of the atrocities of war that Russia is allegedly behind. And just recently, you probably saw even today that, and I watched the clip. I was kind of laughing a little bit that the entire staff of the Russian TV channel, The Rain, they resigned during a live stream. And the words at the end, as they all walked out, and it had to be 50 people that kind of went past the cameras. They said no war, and then they played Swan Lake ballet video, just like they did on the USSR TV channels when it collapsed in the past. So it was kind of a very strong statement that they made, and it looks like from a global standpoint, many countries are getting behind Ukraine. But again, I mean, this is not a political podcast, but it's interesting how cyber continually is weaving into the conversation of this war, of politics, and of government. It's replacing the guns and bullets, I keep saying, of many traditional wars. Not to minimize the poor damage that's happening over there in Ukraine, but in addition to it, cyber is now becoming a key strategic part of warfare on a global scale now, which is very concerning. I know from our standpoint, but really it should be for everybody's, because it affects everybody. And things now happen instantly because we are all connected to the internet, and everything is interconnected. So we can read about it, hear about it. We could vent our frustrations on social media, as some people are doing, but social media can also be manipulated and pulled down. So the issue of data privacy and many other things just keep coming into play as well.
Yeah, when emotions run high, you really start to see some people's true colors and some
Yes.
companies' true colors, and it's kind of scary, because I'm hearing. I mean, we're seeing announcements in addition to this. But I'm hearing stories of uh, people, hacktivists or
Hmm.
companies kind of pointing the finger and blaming. And a lot of times, there's a lot of collateral damage, and a lot of innocent people are getting caught in this kind of cyber,
Yeah. Cyber crossfire.
exactly. I'm hearing about not just Ukrainian civilians getting caught in this, but innocent Russian civilians, these the
Mhm.
citizens that don't
Yep.
know. They might not know about the war, or maybe they do know about it and think it's terrible. But there's a lot of talk about vital infrastructure and services getting cut off to these people, and they're not really part of the game. They're not these wartime chess pieces like you would think they are. They're just like anyone else, except they happen to have been born in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the Swan Lake. According to this report, they said that some of the Russian airwaves reportedly the Ukrainian national anthem has been
Oh
hacked
boy.
to play over the Russian airwaves. So that must be driving some of those oligarchs crazy,
Oh
and some
boy.
of the state
Yeah.
officials and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's
Um,
just a mess across the board, I think. And but again, cyber keeps coming back into the conversation in
mm,
all these different angles, and I think it shouts to all of us that all of us do need to be diligent and do the best we can to kind of keep the house in order. Whether you're just an average consumer, if you're running a small business, if you work at a large enterprise, we all need to protect our personal information, be careful where we're what websites we're visiting, make sure we've got the long strong passwords, using multi-factor authentication, have a good cyber hygiene, especially during all this mess. Or you may be part of the casualties, because everybody is now being targeted. So if you're seeing what's happening, is there's a lot of people throughout the US government that have been informing people to be on high alert, especially the banking institutions, the critical infrastructure sector. So if our business crosses any of those things, which is pretty much everybody, we got to be extra careful. We got to be diligent and not get cyber complacent, let's say, because we could be part of a large problem if something's hacked and targeted.
oh yeah, and just some of these stories also on more, I guess, more of a personal note. I remember when the Berlin Wall came down and the kind of dissolution of the Soviet Union. Could you imagine if the internet was around at that
Oh,
time and
forget it.
cyber warfare was a thing? It would, my takeaways from those days were um, David Hasselhoff dancing on the Berlin Wall and singing,
Yep.
and the famous speech Reagan, Mr. Gorbachev, tear
Yes.
down that wall.
Tear it down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are like the takeaways. There would be like thousands of takeaways if something like that dramatic happened today,
Yes.
that affected the US and so many other countries. So I think we're seeing the very tip of these images and stories coming out. Even
Absolutely.
if this war lasts another week or month or year, I think we're just going to see thousands more of these small and big items coming from these news outlets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about it. Oftentimes, when things are happening, even though we hear of things almost immediately with social media and the news, sometimes companies and organizations don't know they've been hacked. And what do I mean by that is every morning I do the headlines on cybercrime radio, and there's a breach every day. There's hundreds of breaches every day, but I have one key breach that stands out that I report on, and just about every one of them, I'm reporting on something that they just found out about the breach today. It's breaking news. Yet the breach actually happened weeks or months ago, and they just realized that somebody was in their network. And all that time it took for them to move around the network laterally and steal data and steal passwords and account information, so on and so forth. So a lot of the damage is done over a period of time when hackers get in. But to my point, you don't realize it. Companies don't realize it because they're business as usual, and they're not focused on checking their network and testing for vulnerabilities and trying to penetrate it and doing things that could actually aggravate it to find those vulnerabilities, expose them so they could shore them up. So companies need to really think about that and do a better job to make sure that they're shoring up their networks, because you don't want to be a statistic. And it takes a long time before a proper forensics investigation is done through the network, so you actually have an idea of what really happened. So there's that weird lapse in time. I'm seeing it again and again with every one of these breaches that I'm reporting on.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of breaches and forensics, we've be I don't want to neglect to mention this episode is sponsored by Cyberlytica, and they look at precisely that. They're looking out for breaches, proactively. That's why their slogan is proactive cybercrime intelligence, because they want to get ahead of the problem before it hits you in your business. So visit cyberlytica.com for more. And that brings us to our third story here. I thought we'd mix it up and do something sort of positive. We do so many
Yeah.
negative stories. This kind of, it makes you feel a little good, although of course it comes from a bad place originally, but it's a good reaction to a bad thing, and that is that so far, three cybersecurity companies have offered free protection to U.S. hospitals, and those companies are Cloudflare, CrowdStrike, and Ping Identity. I think they offered the story I got from a Washington Post, and in there it said, I think it said 4 months of free services, because I guess what they're trying to do is they're really worried that the U.S. is going to face retaliation from Russian hackers, and surely we are in some form. Nothing's happened yet that I've heard, nothing large enough to really put everyone on full alert. So these companies, good on them. They stepped forward and said,
Yeah.
we're going to proactively look at our most vulnerable things in infrastructure, and that's the hospitals, the power, and the water. They determined were the three main things, and we're going to offer free protection to these guys for several months, because I guess they're predicting, for the next several months we're going to be at cyber war with Russia, and so they're going to be throwing all types of things at us. And the last thing you want is something as important as clean water to go bad or not come at all. You don't want no power. We know what that becomes like a fight for your life when you don't have power. And hospitals, we saw a little bit of that when COVID patients overran hospitals, and that's just normal medical stuff. Imagine the whole hospital being shut down or ransomware being demanded for the hospital. We've seen those stories too. What do you think? You've spoken to many audiences over the years at events and stuff, all about these infrastructure and the importance of maintaining infrastructure. Do you think this is the right call for these companies to do this, so they the right infrastructure to protect?
Absolutely, and kudos to them that they've got the guts to do this, that they've got the I guess finances to do it, because it costs money, it costs resources, and these are obviously companies doing very well in the world of cybersecurity. Cloudflare, everybody's heard of, and certainly Ping Identity. CrowdStrike is one that I certainly like, and it's led by George Kurtz. He's the CEO, but he's also the founder, and their name is often out there because they do so much with threat intelligence, cyber attacks, endpoint security. They really know what they're doing. They've been around enough. They're on, in the stock market. But these companies, again, I would say thank you to them. And maybe they're setting a trend, and some other cybersecurity companies may step up and work closer with CISA and other U.S. government organizations to make it a safer place and to fight back. Because I've always said in the past few years, interview after interview, I said, we need to do more, bring the public and private sectors together, sharing information with the government, and the government sharing information with big tech companies to work together to fight against the cyber criminals. Because if you go in the dark web, there's a lot of free information. There's a lot of knowledge base and videos and how to and customer support. Bad guys helping bad guys. Well, the good guys aren't doing that enough. So this is a really positive step, I think, taking it forward and sharing these best practices in the world of cyber, but to especially this area of being targeted. We know hospitals, they're being targeted. Critical infrastructure has been targeted and will continue to be targeted, and they are very vulnerable. And that, I think, affects our lives. When we hear about, the other week McDonald's was hacked, we hear about other companies, large name companies, we're concerned. But if you go for a week and you can't have your hamburger, you're going to make do. You'll survive. But guess what? If you're in a hospital and maybe the ER where you're getting critical care and the hospital goes down, and it could mean your life. And we've already talked about ransomware cases where hospitals have been locked down out of their networks, and they've had to turn people away. In the process, people have died. So it's affecting lives. Critical infrastructure affects our lives every single day with clean water and sewer and electric and everything else. So I just think it's really nice to see the positive as you mentioned, in the world of cyber. It's not all negative. People can make a difference, and companies can make a difference when they do great stuff like this.
Yeah, it's great to see, like you said, it's great to see private entities coming forth. You know, it's one thing for politicians to make speeches and
Yeah.
rally the citizens. And it's another thing for social media to just, create engagement by creating controversy. And, it might be for good cause, but in the end, they're just trying to get more clicks, of course. But these companies are stepping up, and that's great to see. One thing I do want to mention that they did clarify in the Washington Post that Cloudflare, technically they've cut off all new business with Russia, but they're
Mm.
still maintaining business. Apparently they do a lot of business for these big wig oligarchs and
Yeah.
Russian companies. So they're in a very awkward position. They if more I suspect if more of these cybersecurity firms take a stance against Russia, they'll probably cave and follow suit. But right
Yes.
now, I think they're kind of holding their ground and saying, like, well, we don't know where this is going to go exactly. So let's not, totally let's not burn every bridge that we have. But it's still good to see, we see there's so many stories about these companies, shutting down people. And
Mhm.
there's vague kind of free speech issues all intertwined with this stuff, and they're trying to silence people for one reason or another. Usually it's petty stuff, it's kind of political stuff. But it's nice to see the other side of the coin when a private company can do something good and not get there's no obvious benefit for these
Yes.
companies. They're just giving free stuff. Yes, they're getting the publicity, but hopefully that publicity will bring more companies on board to do the same thing. Because the it could end up being the only way that this war stops, is that Putin just gets so much criticism and
Hmm.
pressure from these large Russian companies and Russian billionaires that he has to withdraw and give up.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think anytime it hits anyone's pocket, people react. If you got to pay extra taxes when tolls go up, when anything goes up, look at gasoline. That's probably the most watched and followed number that affects everybody's pocket directly, perhaps unless you have an electric vehicle. That people get upset when you hear how high the gas prices are. And when you go to fill up your gas guzzling SUV like I have, and it's well over $100, you go, ooh, you start to think twice and say, wow, okay, yeah, can you do it once or twice? Sure. But a prolonged over a year or going forward, you start to think differently and say, maybe I don't need to drive an inefficient vehicle anymore.
Mhm.
Maybe I should consider an electric vehicle. Your mindset changes when it affects your pocket. So I think the same thing will happen, to your point, with Putin. It's affecting his pocket, it's affecting his cronies' pockets, and it's going to probably effectuate a change more than just about anything else that could be done around the globe. You can give him sanctions, he could yawn. He's got sanctions before, he'll get them again. Um, you could threaten him. It doesn't seem like he changes his game plan unless it really hits his pocket. And I guess the jury's out. We'll see shortly if it does have effect. But it
Mhm.
sure would nice to see this end, because I think too many innocent people are dying. They're not even part of the war. They're just victims, be it not just Ukrainians. They're getting the brunt of it, obviously, and I feel terrible there. But even innocent Russian citizens, they probably don't even want a war, and they're not even supporting Putin. Yet they're just there because of, geographically, they're kind of branded or stamped. Either way, killing people in a war with these atrocities is just terrible, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I guess that wraps up our stories for this episode. Before we sign out, do you want to plug anything? Do you have any upcoming gigs or articles,
Just
interviews, anything?
doing a lot of articles. I'm doing some judging for actually two different um, cybersecurity related matters. I'll be sharing that once I can make it more public. But honored to be selected as a judge there, and more is forthcoming. And then also I'm looking forward to an in-person show at RSA, doing some interviews and stuff there, working with Cybersecurity Ventures, Cybercrime Magazine, and excited to be in RSA San Francisco for the duration of that event in person. And I think there's a virtual tie-in too for people that can't make it or are a little nervous, which I always appreciate. So that there's going to be some exciting stuff there. I know when I was at the last live RSA, it was just jam-packed and there was so much going on that it's probably one of the most anticipated security events of the year. But it's interesting because normally it's in end of February, beginning of March timeframe, but it's shifted to the beginning of June because of the pandemic,
right,
and travel and all the other stuff. So it's good to see things are lightening up, getting better, and I'm looking forward to doing that show and just doing a lot of interviews, a lot of writing, and a lot of stuff all over the map in the world of cyber. Most of it just tied to Ukraine and Russia, though, and cyber hacks. That's still the hottest topic going on out there.
Yeah, I imagine it's going to be hot. Who knows? It might still be the hot topic into RSA.
Could be.
Show.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. And I've been doing a lot of podcasts. I did, I think, 3 different podcasts this week, and it's interesting. Even though the focus of the podcast, they wanted me on to talk about senior cyber. Another one was our second book, Cybersecurity is Everybody's Business. In those discussions, they wanted me to weigh in on my thoughts about cybersecurity and the war over there in Ukraine. It's just a hot topic, and people like to get feedback and get different feelings from different people.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll be covering it as a hot topic in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah.
And just one last time, I'll mention that this episode was sponsored by Cyberlytica, providing proactive cybercrime intelligence. You want to get over to cyberlytica.com and learn more about all their things. But until next week, this is Craig signing out from the West Coast.
All right. And thanks everybody for listening in. This is Scott Schober signing out from the East Coast. Have a good one.
Stay safe.
Cyber coast to coast with your hosts Scott and Craig Schober.